Hello everybody, my name is Mario5514 and welcome back to another Splatoon Talk video. In this video we're going to be looking at some what-if patch notes for 9.4 for Splatoon 3. Keep in mind these are only what-ifs of what we could get. Some of these ideas are actually reasonable, while others are ideas I came up with myself. And this took a long time for you to make, so keep that in mind. Anyway, let's go. First up, before we get started, we also have a legend here, so you guys won't get confused on why the letters are in different colors. If you see them in green, it's a buff, yellow is a rework, and then red is a nerf. And with the confusion out of the way, let's get started. First up is the Splatter Shot and 10 attack Splatter Shot. Its current damage is at 36, which is the max that these weapons can inflict. We see that in Splatoon 1 before their damage output was nerfed to 35 by, I think, 2.7, for Splatoon 1, before it got buffed right back to 36, which is the max. Ink consumption sits at 0.92%, which is very reasonable and is not bad for these weapons. The PFS for its regular model is 210p, while the 10 attack sits at 190p. Overall, I don't see any major changes for these weapons. They're currently fine as they are, so they don't deserve any nerfs, and they don't need any more buffs. So they're good all-around weapons with very solid weapon kits. Next up is the .96 Gal and .96 Gal Deco. It currently sits at 62 damage, as it did in Splatoon 1 before 2.7 when it was nerfed to 52, like the 52 Gal, which we'll talk about in a bit. Before it was buffed right back to 62. Its ink consumption sits at 2.3%, which is not bad, but it's one of the most ink hungriest shooters in the game. For the regular model, its PFS sits at 190p, while the Deco variant sits at 210p. I think for the 96 Deco, we could decrease its PFS from 210p to 200p, and then for both their weapons, increase their minimum damage from 35 to 36. So yeah, we could definitely have this weapon still be the best in the league, better than the Splatter Shot Pro. Next up is the Range Blaster and Custom Range Blaster, or CRB as it's called by the Splatoon 1 players. Its current damage is at 70 for splash damage and 125 for a direct hit. Its ink consumption is at 10%, making it the most ink-hungriest weapon in the game. And they both share 210p for their PFS. I think for both the weapons, we can decrease their PFS from 210p to 200p. And for both the weapons, we can decrease their ink consumption from 10% to 9%. So, I mean, that's a slight boost for these weapons, considering the fact that they have the worst painting than any other weapon in the game. So this would definitely help out for them. Next up is the Dynamo Roller and Gold Dynamo Roller. You see the current stats with its rolling, grounded, and midair damage. Ink consumption is very high for these weapons in grounded and midair attacks, or vertical and horizontal flicks. The regular model sits at 190p, and the gold model sits at 180p for their PFS. I think for both the weapons, we can decrease their frame rate by 10 frames when you're performing a horizontal and vertical flick. Definitely the vertical flick. I don't know about the horizontal, but this would be helpful as well. And then decrease their ink consumption from 18 to 16% for grounded and midair attacks, horizontal or vertical flicks. So yeah, that would definitely help the Dynamo Rollers very much in the long run. But I just don't think Nintendo would add them though. Next up is the .52 Gal and the .52 Gal Deco. Their current damage, as you know, sits at 52. Their ink consumption is at 1.2%, which is actually not bad for the weapon, considering the fact it's the most hated weapon in the game. For the regular model, its PFS is at 200p, while the Deco variant sits at 190p. I think for some of the nerfs that I think people would like to see, we could increase their ink consumption from 1.2% to 1.6% without hindering the weapon's use entirely. And then for the 52 Deco, we could increase its PFS from 190p to 200p, so it's not just going to keep getting screen all the time. So yeah, I think these would work to some of the people's benefits, but I doubt Nintendo would add these nerfs to these weapons. Yeah, I just don't see it happening though. Next up is the Undercover and Undercover Cerellabrella. So these Brellas are kind of in a bad spot right now, but their current damage sits at 40%, their ink consumption's at 4%, and they both share a PFS of 180p. I think for both weapons we can increase their canopy health from 200 to 250, and then increase its base damage from 12 to 14, as each pellet currently does 12 damage. Increasing it to 14 would definitely give the weapon a much needed boost, and a canopy buff for it would definitely make it a lot more useful in battle, considering the position they're in. Next up are the Gloogadoolies and the Gloogadoolies Deco. They currently sit at 36 for their total damage or base damage. Their ink consumption is very high for their rolling compared to their regular 1.4% consumption when just shooting. For the regular model, its PFS sits at 180p, while the Deco variant sits at 190p. I think the only thing I would like for the weapons is decrease their ink consumption when rolling from 8% to 6%. Definitely give this weapon something to fight with, and not only that, you'd have enough ink to continue when you're in turret mode. So yeah, decreasing its ink consumption when rolling to 6% would definitely give you much more ink that is needed, that you want to use when you're a turret. So yeah, this would definitely work a lot better. Next up is the Tri-Slosher and Tri-Slosher Novo. Their current damage sits at 62. Its ink consumption is at 6%. PFS for the regular Tri-Slosher is at 180p, while the Novo model is at 210p. I think for the regular Tri-Slosher, we could nerf its PFS from 180p to 190p, and for the Novo model, we'll buff it, decrease its PFS from 210p down to 200p. This was actually this was one of the buffs that people wanted the Tri-Slosher Novo to have. A PFS buff, decreasing it from 210p to like 200p. Some suggested 190p. I think 200p would still be exceptional. It would definitely match the NZAP 85 as it has 200p, which we'll talk about in a bit. So yeah, I think for these two weapons, a nerf and a buff for their PFS would definitely work. But I just don't think Nintendo would add it. If they did add it, that'd be funny. Next up is the Recycled Brellas, MK1 and MK2. Their current damage is at 90, their ink consumption's at 6%, they both share a PFS of 190p. I think for both the weapons, we can decrease the time to regenerate their canopies from 2.17 seconds to 2.1 seconds. And then for both the weapons, we can increase their HP or their canopy's health from 100 to 150. Definitely giving it a much needed, or just give it something that would be favorable with some of the players who use these Brellas. But I don't think Nintendo would add them. Next up are the Splatbrella and Cerellabrella. Their current damage sits at 81, their ink consumption is at 5.5%. The regular Splatbrella shares a PFS of 200p, while the Cerellabrella is at 190p. I think for the Splatbrella, we could buff its PFS, decreasing it from 200p to 190p, making it get triple ink strike a lot faster than before. Definitely be on the same lines with the 10 attack splatter shot. For both the weapons, we can decrease their decrease the amount of time to regenerate their canopy from 5.5 seconds to 4 seconds, which would definitely be something. And then increase their canopy health from 500 to 550. This would definitely be interesting for both the Splatbrella and Cerellabrella to have. But I just don't think Nintendo would add these at all. But I mean, it would be cool to see the Splatbrella get a PFS buff, so it can get triple ink strike a little faster. Next up is the Octobrush and Octobrush Novo. Their current damage is at 40, ink consumption is 3% when flicking and 9% when sliding. The regular model is at 190p for its PFS, while the Novo model is at 180p. For both the weapons, we can decrease their ink consumption while sliding from 9% down to 8%, and then give the player ink resistance when sliding. So what that means is, what we see with the ink brush is that when you're moving around, when you're sliding on your ink brush, even if you try to move into enemy ink when sliding, you will not move into it or take damage from it. So I think giving that same ink resistance slide for the Octobrush would definitely be a huge benefit, considering the fact I don't think Octobrush has the same thing as Inkbrush. Even though Octobrush is slightly slower, it deals an increased amount of damage compared to the Inkbrush. So yeah, these would definitely work, but I just don't think Nintendo would add them though. Next up are the Ballpoint Splatling and Ballpoint Novo. Their current damage sits at 28 for its first stage of firing and then 30 for its second stage. So yeah, Ballpoint Splatling is one of the Splatlings that you can recharge when firing. The Nautilus shares the same mechanic as the Ballpoint. So the first stage of firing is that you fire at a same range as the Splattershot Junior from what I found out, and then the second stage is like long range, which means you have longer range than the heavy Splatling, and you're kind of rivaling the Hydra Splatling, and this is more favorable compared to Hydra. Their ink consumption is at 25% when you're at a full charge. For the regular model, its PFS is at 210p, while the Novo model is at 200p. I think for both weapons, we could decrease their ink consumption at full charge from 25% to 23%. And then for the regular Ballpoint, we could decrease its PFS from 210p to 200p, so it's able to get inkjet a little faster than it currently is right now. I think the inkjet buff would definitely be helping, like decreasing its PFS. That would definitely work for Ballpoint, but I just don't think Nintendo would have any kind of interest in it. But I mean, it would be very cool for that to happen. All right, next up are the Carbon Roller and Carbon Roller Deco. We have the damage output for rolling, grounded, and mid-air attacks. And ink consumption sits at 1.2 to 6, between 1.2 to 6% when rolling, depending on how fast you're moving. And you spend almost 4%. You consume almost 4% of ink for grounded and mid-air attacks. For the Carbon Roller, its PFS sits at 160p, while for the Deco model, it sits at 190p. I think for both the weapons, we can decrease its ink consumption from 3.96% to 3.94%, so just a slight buff, nothing much. And then for the Deco model, we could decrease its PFS from 190p to 180p, making it get Trizuka a little faster. I mean, Carbon Deco and Splattershot are the most popular Trizuka weapons right now. And giving the Carbon Roller Deco a PFS buff would definitely make the weapon more usable than Splattershot. But I just don't think Nintendo would add these ideas. But it would be a cool idea to see in action. Next up, we have the Mini Splatling and Zinc Mini Splatling. Current damage sits at 32 for each pellet, and its ink consumption's at 15% for both the weapons. For the regular Mini Splatling, its PFS is at 190p, while the Zinc model's at 200p. I think the only thing I would like to see for it is a decrease in ink consumption from 15% to 13%. This would definitely make the weapons more usable, and not only that, give it more time to actually attack before going in with the Ultra Stamp for the regular Mini Splatling. And then for the Zinc Mini Splatling, it's able to continue attacking after deploying Big Bubbler without any problems. Alright, next up, Dark Tetradualies and Light Tetradualies. Their current damage sits at 28, their ink consumption's at 0.8% when just firing and 3% when doing a dodge roll. For the Dark Tetradualies, its PFS is at 200p, while for the light models, it's at 190p. I think for both the weapons, we can increase their firing accuracy by 3%, and we could increase their damage output from 28 to 30, making them more usable since they're not very good in attacking except for just being a pain in the butt. But yeah, it would be a good idea to see these ideas in action, but I don't think Nintendo would add them though. Next up are the Dually Squelchers and Custom Dually Squelchers. The current damage sits at 28 with its ink consumption at 1.2% when just firing and then 8% when rolling. The Dually Squelchers sit at 200p for its PFS, while the custom model is at 210p. I think for both the weapons we can increase their firing accuracy by 2%. And then for the custom model we could give it a PFS buff, decreasing it from 210p to 200p, so it's able to get Super Chump a little faster. Considering the fact the NZAP 89 is just the spammer in Super Chump, which we'll talk about in a bit. I think these would definitely work, but I don't think these would happen though. Next up are the Sloshing Machine and Neo Sloshing Machine. They both sit at 76 for a direct hit and 38 for a splash for those slosh attacks. Its ink consumption is at 9.2%. For its PFS, the regular model sits at 220p, while the Neo variant is at 190p. I think for both the weapons, we can decrease their ink consumption from 9.2% to just 9%. And then for the regular model, decrease its PFS from 220p to 210p, so it's able to get Booyah Bomb a little faster. Considering the fact the only weapons that people consider using with Booyah Bomb is the Forge Splattershot Pro and the S-Blast 91, which we'll talk about in a bit. These could work, but I don't think Nintendo would add these, though. And next up is the Splooshmatic and Neo Sploosh. Their current damage is at 38, their ink consumption is at 0.8%, and their PFS for the Sploosh is at 180p, and for the Neo variant, it's 170p. I think for both weapons, we could increase the player's movement speed when firing from 0.08 to 0.12 units per frame, meaning that you're able to move a little faster when firing the weapon, and then increase its damage output from 38 to 40. Since Splooshmatic only works in close range, I think increasing its damage would definitely be beneficial for the weapon, making it more of a pain, as well as being a little more aggressive at close range. But I just don't see this happening. If Nintendo would look at these, I don't think they would add them at all. Next up is the Splattershot Nova and the Anaki Splattershot Nova. They currently sit at 24 damage, its ink consumption is at 0.96%, and for its PFS, the regular model sits at 190p, while the Anaki variant sits at 210p. I think for both weapons, we can decrease their ink consumption from 0.96% to 0.94%. And then for the regular model, nerf its PFS, increase it from 190p to 200p, so it's not able to spam Killer Whale 5.1 as much. I mean, these could work, but I don't know if Nintendo would ever add these. But I mean, they do kind of look good in some case. Next up is the Clash Blaster and Neo Clash Blaster. They both have, their current damage sits at 30 for a splash and then 60 for a direct hit. Yeah, 30 for its blast radius damage. Ink consumption's at 4%, and for its PFS, the regular model sits at 180p and the Neo variant is at 170p. I think for both weapons, we could increase their blast radius from 4 units to 4.5 units, making the weapons more annoying in tower control. And yeah, these are the Clash Blaster is one of the most popular weapons in tower control, as you're able to just push your opponents off the tower and just be a pain in the butt. But I mean, the main weapon itself just sucks. But I think increasing its range would be better a bit, but the main weapon itself still sucks. Next up is the NZAP 85 and 89. Their current damage sits at 30, which is the highest maximum damage that they can inflict. Their ink consumption is at 0.8%, and for their PFS, the 85 model sits at 200p, while the 89 sits at 170p. NZAP 85 is one of the most popular tactical options next to the Snipe Rider 5H, and the, Snipe Rider 5H and NZAP 85 are the most common or most popular tactical options in the entire game. I think for these weapons, we don't no change for them at all. We don't need any buffs or nerfs. They are fine as they are. Alright, S-Blast 92 and S-Blast 91. Their current damage is, for a direct hit, it's at 125, and then for their splash damage or blast radius is between 50 to 70. Their ink consumption sits at 8.5%, and for their PFS, the 92 model sits at 180p, while the 91 model sits at 200p. I think for both weapons, we could just decrease their ink consumption from 8.5% to just 8%. Considering the fact the S-Blast uses less ink than the Range Blaster, which uses 10%. So I think decreasing it to 8% would definitely make the weapons more enjoyable, and at the same time, make them more aggressive. Next up is the Squeezer and Foil Squeezer. They currently sit at 38 for just pressing ZR when you're doing the semi-auto shots, and then 30 when you're just holding it for like fully automatic. Their ink consumption is at 2.4% when doing the semi-auto shots long range, and then 1.08% for holding ZR for its fully automatic mode. For the PFS, the regular model sits at 220p, and then for the foil model, it sits at 190p. I think for the regular squeezer, we could decrease its PFS from 220p to 210p, so it's on the same page with the splatter shot as it gets its Trizooka at 210p compared to the squeezer, which currently sits at 220p. And for both weapons, we could increase their ink consumption, so nerf it from 1.08 to 1.1%. So nothing much there. I could definitely see a PFS buff to the regular squeezer, having to get Trizooka easier like the splatter shot. But I don't think Nintendo would add that at all. Alright, next up is GooTuber and Custom GooTuber. Their current damage sits at 180 for a full charge. Its ink consumption is between 2 to 15% depending on how much of a charge you have in the weapon, and in both the weapons share a PFS of 200p. I think for both weapons we could buff or decrease their charge time from 1.18 seconds to 1.12 seconds, making it a little faster to charge the weapon to full charge, and decrease its ink consumption for a full charge from 15 to 13%. This would definitely be interesting for these weapons to have. Alright, next up is the Splattershot Pro and Forge Splattershot Pro. They currently sit at 45 for their damage, their ink consumption's at 2%, and its PFS for the regular model is 180p, while the Forge model is at 210p. I think for just the Forge model, we can decrease its PFS from 210p to 200p, making it having to get Booyah Bomb a little faster than before, and it would definitely rival the S-Blast 91, but the S-Blast 91 is pretty much peak. Alright, now we're going to talk about our sub-weapons. First up is Burst Bomb. I think we could decrease its ink consumption from 45% to 40%, and then increase its blast radius from 2.8 to 3 units. I don't think this would happen, but I think this would definitely give Burst Bomb a much-needed edge. Next up is Angle Shooter. I think we could decrease its ink consumption from 40 to 35%, and then increase its AoE duration from 2 seconds to 4 seconds. But I mean, Angle Shooter itself just sucks currently. And then finally, Splat Bomb. We could increase its blast radius from 3.6 to 3.8%, and then decrease its ink consumption from 70 to 65%. Nothing much there, but I don't think the devs would add it. It would just be a pain for some people. Alright, next up, we're gonna talk about our specials. First up is Super Chump. It currently does 70 damage for a direct hit, and then 35 for a splash. Its current health sits at 60. I think increasing its health per chump from 60 to 80 would definitely give it a much needed boost and would make it more reliable in combat. Compared to where it currently is, it's just in a bad spot, so I think increasing its health would definitely put it in a good spot and make it more usable. Next up is the Splatter Color Screen. I think we could rework its audio by reducing it. Reduce its audio when holding the special. So what that means is when you press the right analog stick and you're holding the canister that contains the Splatter Color Screen, you hear that hissing sound. So we could reduce its audio or even eliminate it, so you'll barely hear it or you won't hear it at all. So the only noises you'll hear is when you throw it, and you also hear when the screen comes out of the canister. So yeah, I think this would definitely work, as a lot of people find its current audio annoying, as its hissing sound is just annoying to deal with. Alright, for Wavebreaker, we could increase its HP from 400 to 450, increase the wave's length by 0.75 units, and then increase its wave damage from 45 to 50. This would definitely be interesting to see for Wavebreaker, as it needs a much needed buff to actually be very fun to use location wise. I mean, the only weapons that work with Wavebreaker are the E-Leaders, Heavy Splatling, and the Dually Squelchers. Next up is Inkstorm. I think we could increase its duration from 8 seconds to 10 seconds, and then increase its damage output from 24 to 26 per second, as it does 0.4 damage per frame, or 24 per second. So yeah, this would definitely be interesting to see Inkstorm have, and would definitely make the custom Jet Squelcher, Nautilus 47, and any other weapon with Inkstorm a lot more effective. Next up is the Kraken Royale. I think for this weapon we could increase its movement speed from 11.52 units to 11.8 units, making it move slightly faster, but at the same time still keeping it at its big slow speed, but just increase it slightly so it's actually able to move around a little more and you're actually able to go after people. And we could rework it so it allows the player to super jump when using the special. Originally, in Splatoon 1, the original Kraken made it that you are still able to super jump when you have the special deployed. With Kraken Royale, that's not the case. So I think allowing the player to super jump when using Kraken Royale would definitely be interesting to see on the battlefield. And finally, the Trizooka. As of 9.3, the Trizooka was nerfed, so instead of having one big hitbox at 53 and then its direct hit doing 20, it now has a outer and inner hitbox. Its outer hitbox doing 35 and inner hitbox doing 53, while its direct hit still does 220. And its base duration was decreased by half a second. So I think for this weapon we could only increase its splash damage from 53 to 55, and that's for the inner hitbox. And that's pretty much it. And that's it. That is all of the patch notes. If you guys like the video, be sure you subscribe, and don't forget to leave a like on the video. If you want to see more videos like this, just send a comment below. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you in the next video. And until then, stay fresh.